Hey guys, tonight we begin with a man who believed the entire Roman Empire was his stage, Emperor Nero. A ruler, a performer, and possibly the only man in history who could burn down his own capital and call it artistic expression. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. You wake up inside a golden stomach. That's the only way to describe it. The Domus Aurea, Nero's golden house, is less a palace and more a very expensive hallucination. The ceiling above you is painted with gods, all of whom, coincidentally, look like Nero with slightly better abs. Your bed is large enough to qualify as real estate. The sheets are silk, the pillows stuffed with swan feathers, and the scent of rose oil hangs in the air so thick it could be used as currency. You'd feel pampered if it weren't for the lingering realization that comfort, in Nero's Rome, usually means someone else's pain. You roll over carefully, because the heavy gold necklace Nero gifted you last week digs into your collarbone like divine irony. He said it made you look radiant. It does. It also makes you look owned. From the balcony, Rome gleams in the distance, marble, smoke, and madness. Somewhere out there, bakers are shouting prices, soldiers are shaking down merchants, and real people are living normal lives. You envy them. They only have to fear taxes. You have to fear applause. The door slides open, and your attendants glide in. 3 silent women whose job description is avoid causing panic. They move like ghosts. Not because it's elegant, but because noise attracts attention, and attention is lethal. They wash your hands in rose water, brush your hair, and whisper blessings that sound suspiciously like warnings. You stare into a polished bronze mirror. Your face looks younger than you feel. The girl reflected there doesn't look like a concubine. She looks like someone still pretending this is temporary. You know better. In Nero's world, beauty isn't a gift. It's bait. Outside, the morning chorus begins. Flutes, harps, and the rhythmic stomp of soldiers changing guard. Somewhere down the hall you hear laughter. Nero's, probably rehearsing his own greatness before breakfast. You sigh. The day has started. You are one of many women in a palace that runs on fear, perfume, and applause. A living ornament in the Empire's biggest play, and as the sun spills over the gold-tiled floor, you mutter your daily prayer. Not for love, not for peace, just for the simple Roman miracle of surviving lunch. Your day truly begins when the servants arrive, a quiet invasion of women who glide into the room like ghosts with excellent posture. They carry towels, combs, and the unspoken rule that nothing they see actually happened. They've mastered the art of existing without sound. Their jewellery doesn't clink, their sandals don't scuff, and their voices have apparently been sacrificed to the gods of discretion. They bathe you, braid your hair, and anoint your skin with oils worth more than their families. You'd feel guilty if guilt were allowed here. The oldest servant, grey hair, eyes like wet marble, handles your jewellery. Every clasp clicks shut like a small reminder that freedom is decorative. She fastens a gold bracelet around your wrist with the precision of someone who's seen too many wrists stop moving. No one speaks unless absolutely necessary. In Nero's palace, words are dangerous currency. A wrong word buys suspicion. A joke buys exile. A whisper buys death, with expedited shipping. These women have learned that silence is survival, and you're learning it too. Once, one of them smiled. Just smiled. Maybe at you, maybe at a thought. The next morning, she was replaced. The palace doesn't explain its substitutions. It simply edits people out like bad lines in a script. When they leave, the air feels heavier. The smell of rose oil clings to everything. A perfume that masks both decadence and decay. You stare at the door after it closes and wonder if anyone in this place still remembers how to laugh out loud. You slip into a linen tunic light enough to pretend comfort and wait for the next sound. footsteps echoing down the marble hall. They always echo too long. The palace was built for acoustics, for performance. Every whisper of sandal leather sounds like someone's verdict approaching. Some mornings you wish they'd speak, tell you a joke, sing. Anything to remind you this isn't a tomb coated in gold. But then again, sound would break the spell. And Nero prefers his beauty quiet. So you sit still, perfumed, polished, perfectly silent. The living statue he'll want to admire later. And in this palace of endless noise, the only thing louder than silence is fear. Breakfast with Nero isn't breakfast. It's performance art. You're summoned before dawn, not because the emperor wakes early, but because he likes others to wait for him. The dining room stretches like a marble ocean, gold ceilings, peacock mosaics, and more slaves than guests. Everything smells of roasted figs, incense, and ambition. You sit among the other concubines, pretending this is normal. No one talks. Talking is for people with rights. You just stare at the table's contents. A chaotic masterpiece of luxury. Honeyed dormice, melon slices shaped like laurels, oysters arranged to spell out Nero. Subtlety died the day he became emperor. When Nero finally enters, everyone straightens like marionettes. He's wearing a toga embroidered with silver vines, his hair curled to perfection by someone who's probably praying for another day of employment. He grins like he invented joy itself, which, in his mind, he probably did. He doesn't greet anyone. He simply sits, waves a hand, and the music begins. Always the lyres. Always the same tragic tune that sounds like what you'd hear if arrogance learned to play an instrument. Then comes his favourite ritual. He performs compliments like other men wage wars. "You look radiant today," he tells one woman, "like Venus herself." Everyone claps politely. You're half convinced Venus is rolling her eyes somewhere on Mount Olympus. When he glances at you, your stomach does that thing it does every time. A sudden calculation of survival odds. "You," he says, "have a face fit for tragedy." You smile, because anything else would be fatal. "Thank you, Caesar," you murmur, praying he meant it as flattery and not foreshadowing. The meal drags on. All performances do. Senators fake laughter, poets recite verses about Nero's genius, and concubines play the world's quietest game of emotional dodgeball. You've mastered the art of smiling without showing teeth, laughing without sound, and pretending you didn't just see a servant escorted out for sneezing. When the emperor finally rises, the room collectively exhales like a single exhausted organism. Breakfast is over. The show is done. You survived another act in the grand comedy of Nero's Rome, a play where everyone knows the ending, but no one dares say it aloud. When Nero looks at you, the world stops, not out of romance, but because everyone nearby quietly prays you won't die. It begins like a solar eclipse. The music fades, conversation wilts, and suddenly the emperor's gaze has landed. You freeze mid-breath, every instinct screaming, "Do not blink." The other concubines lower their eyes, practicing the ancient Roman art of becoming invisible. He studies you the way a cat studies a bird. Curious, calculating, possibly hungry. "You," he says, in that languid drawl that makes compliments sound like warnings. "You remind me of tragedy." You smile, because in Nero's Rome, flattery and foreboding are often the same sentence. He waves you closer. Every step feels like a bad idea, but bad ideas are the only kind allowed here. He gestures to your hair. Too long, too short, too something. "We must paint you," he says suddenly. "Gold, perhaps." Like the sun, you nod, thinking at least it's not tar. His attention is intoxicating, not in the romantic sense, but in the poison slowly entering your bloodstream sense. One day you're invisible, the next you're divine. And in this palace, divinity has a short shelf life. The courtiers watch you with the pitying fascination of people observing an execution in slow motion. They've seen this before. the favourite of the week. She'll dine beside him, laugh at his jokes, maybe even inspire a song or a scandal, and then she'll vanish. The palace always finds new ways to make people disappear. Nero smiles again. "You should attend me this evening," he murmurs, like he's offering salvation instead of doom. You bow low, murmuring, "As Caesar commands." When he turns away, the room breathes again. A senator refills his wine. A musician pretends not to tremble. You return to your seat, heart pounding, smile glued in place. You've seen what happens to those who refuse him. You've also seen what happens to those who please him too much. In the emperor's palace, being noticed is worse than being ignored. It means you've become part of the story, and Nero doesn't like happy endings. So you sip your watered wine, steady your breath, and prepare for tonight, the beginning of your brief and shining nightmare. By now, you've learned that life in Nero's palace isn't about living. It's about outlasting. Survival here isn't instinct. It's an art form. You study it the way poets study rhyme and gladiators study pain. Every gesture, every glance, every breath must be calculated. Smile too wide and you look ambitious. Smile too little and you look defiant. There's no middle ground, only different styles of doom. The concubines have their own unspoken school of etiquette, a secret academy where lessons are taught in whispers. The curriculum is simple. Rule 1. Never speak unless Nero speaks first. Rule 2. If Nero laughs, you laugh, even if he's quoting himself, especially if he's quoting himself. Rule 3. Never cry in public. Tears attract poets, and poets attract trouble. You've also learned the hierarchy of attention. The emperor's affection is a rotating throne. One day, a girl from Hispania is the goddess of the hour, dripping in emeralds and smugness. The next, she's retired to a villa conveniently located nowhere on any map. The trick isn't to be adored. It's to be forgettable in just the right way. Your best skill now is invisibility. You glide through corridors like a perfume ghost. Always there, never seen. The guards barely acknowledge you, which is good, because attention in this palace burns hotter than oil lamps. Sometimes you think of the women who came before you, the ones whose portraits still hang in hidden galleries. Each one immortalized in marble, eyes cast heavenward, probably wondering how long eternity lasts in storage. You'd think it's depressing. It isn't. It's oddly comforting. If nothing else, you're part of a grand Roman tradition, the expendable muse. In the evenings, you write little prayers on scraps of parchment, not to Jupiter or Venus, they've clearly abandoned this address, but to Fortuna, goddess of luck and survival. You burn the paper, watch the smoke rise and whisper, "Just one more day." You've stopped dreaming about escape. That's for people with choices. Instead, you dream about blending in so perfectly that Nero forgets you exist, until he forgets entirely. Because in this palace, the smartest thing you can be isn't beautiful or loyal, it's unnoticed. Afternoons in the palace are for art, or at least Nero's version of it, which usually involves trauma and applause. The emperor calls it rehearsal. Everyone else calls it endurance training. The performance hall glitters like a temple to narcissism. Marble columns, gilded ceilings, and frescoes of Apollo that all somehow look like Nero. He claims it's a coincidence. No one argues. Coincidences tend to end up exiled. You take your seat with the other concubines, a row of painted smiles and clenched stomachs. Musicians tune their instruments, and Nero steps onto the stage, dressed in flowing silk robes that make him look like a divine curtain. He adjusts his laurel crown, raises his lyre, and says, "Today I shall express the tragedy of Troy." You almost feel bad for Troy. The music begins, an unholy combination of screeching strings and emotional confusion. The courtiers nod, pretending to hear genius. Nero's voice fills the hall, wavering between opera and open threat. You clap in rhythm because not clapping would be treason, and clapping too early would be suicide. Halfway through, he stops. You! He points suddenly, at you. Your soul briefly leaves your body. What did you feel? He demands. You think fast. Sorrow, my lord. Such divine sorrow. He squints, then smiles. Ah, you understand art. He returns to his lyre, pleased. You exhale so quietly, it barely counts as breathing. The rehearsal drags on for hours. Nero's sense of time, like his sanity, is flexible. Senators collapse discreetly from heat. Slaves faint and are carried away like props between acts. At one point, Nero improvises a monologue about his own greatness that lasts longer than the Trojan War. You watch the other concubines carefully. Their applause is synchronized, the rhythm of survival. They've mastered the ability to look enraptured while thinking about dinner. You're learning from them. Quickly. When it finally ends, Nero bows to himself. Art, he declares, is eternal. You almost say, so is this performance, but you enjoy living too much. As he strides off, the courtiers erupt in applause that sounds suspiciously like relief. You rise with the others, your hands aching from clapping, your face frozen in admiration. Another masterpiece survived, another afternoon rehearsed to perfection, pretending to love a song no one dares to stop. By afternoon, the palace settles into its favourite pastime, gossip. Not the cheerful kind about fashion or affairs, but the kind whispered like a prayer for self-preservation. The concubines have perfected it into an Olympic event. Every smile hides intelligence gathering, every compliment masks surveillance. Did you hear? Someone murmurs as a servant passes by. The phrase could mean anything from a senator was executed to Nero changed his haircut again. Both are equally dangerous topics. You've learned the rhythm of palace rumours, slow, soft, always fatal. A missing dancer, a banished poet, a cook who accidentally salted the emperor's figs twice. The palace eats mistakes faster than it eats dinner. Still, gossip is the only freedom left, the only rebellion allowed in whispers. Late at night, behind curtains heavy with perfume, the concubines exchange secrets the way soldiers trade weapons. She smiled at him too long. He called her by the wrong name. Someone saw Poppia cry. Every rumour is a warning dressed as entertainment. One woman, Cassia, sharp as a dagger and twice as thin, leans toward you. They say Nero dreams of Olympus now, she whispers. He thinks he's Jupiter reborn. You don't react. Rule number 1 of gossip, never look surprised. Rule number 2, never repeat anything sober. The problem is, rumours here come true too often. Nero doesn't dream small. If he's not performing as a god, he's punishing people for not clapping loudly enough. Once, a man hesitated during applause. By the next day, his estate had mysteriously burned down, along with the man himself. Rome calls it coincidence. You call it foreshadowing. Even the servants are infected by it. Their silence has become a language of its own, a glance, a twitch, the tremor of a hand placing wine. They know before anyone who will fall from favour. Sometimes they know before the victim does. So you keep your face neutral, your tone light, and your eyes down. In Nero's palace, knowledge isn't power. It's contraband. The women around you giggle faintly, like birds chirping before a storm. You laugh too, just enough to blend in. Because in this place, gossip isn't conversation, it's camouflage. If hell had a spa, it would look like this. The bath chamber is enormous. Marble floors, gilded fountains, and a ceiling painted with cherubs who look disturbingly judgmental. Steam drifts through the air like ghosts trying to escape. Servants bustle about with bronze pitchers, pouring mixtures that cost more than a small farm. You step into a pool of warm milk, honey, and oil. The Roman recipe for eternal beauty, or, depending on perspective, being basted alive. The first dip always feels divine. The second reminds you that comfort in this palace is just another form of control. Nero doesn't want concubines. He wants living art. shiny, sweet-smelling proof that his empire is too rich to know shame. As attendants scrub your arms, you wonder where all this luxury comes from. Somewhere out there, entire provinces are probably being taxed just so your elbows can smell like almonds. Empires have collapsed over less ambitious skincare routines. The silence in the room is absolute, broken only by the sound of water lapping against marble. It's supposed to be serene, but it feels like an execution conducted by candlelight. The servants don't look at you, don't speak, don't breathe too loud. In Nero's palace, even scrubbing someone's back carries political consequences. After the bath, they dry you with soft linen, then anoint your skin with scented oils, jasmine, myrrh, and something else no one dares to name. The smell is intoxicating, almost divine, and completely exhausting. You could be sacrificed at any moment and still smell delightful doing it. Cassia, the sharp-tongued concubine, joins you at the edge of the bath, eyeing your reflection in the mirrored bronze. "You smell like a bribe," she says softly. You smile. "And you smell like treason." She grins. Compliment accepted. For a brief moment, the two of you laugh. Quietly, of course. It's the only rebellion left that doesn't end with cremation. Then a servant enters, bowing low. "The Emperor requests your presence tonight." Your smile freezes. The oils on your skin feel suddenly heavier. Perfumed, polished, perfected. You're no longer a person. You're preparation. And somewhere beyond those golden halls, Nero is already tuning his lyre. As the sun begins to bleed over Rome, the palace transforms. The day's exhaustion melts into something far more dangerous: anticipation. Servants rush like ants, lighting hundreds of oil lamps until the Domus Aurea glows like a molten jewel. The scent of burning myrrh seeps into every corridor, sweet and suffocating, like the empire itself. You and the other concubines are dressed again, this time in silks that glimmer when you breathe. Every fold of fabric, every jeweled pin, is part of the performance. You're not dressing for modesty or warmth. You're dressing for survival. Nero calls it a banquet. Everyone else calls it tonight's audition for mercy. The parade begins. Concubines first, then senators, then sycophants. You glide down the hall in pairs, eyes forward, hands folded, smiles pre-installed. The walls shimmer with gold leaf, reflecting hundreds of faces that all look terrified in excellent lighting. As you pass a line of Praetorian guards, one of them sneezes. No one reacts, but you feel a collective shudder ripple down the hall. Somewhere, a mental note is made. He sneezed in Nero's presence. That man's career, and possibly his lungs, are over. The banquet chamber looks like Jupiter's fever dream. Golden couches, marble fountains spouting wine, and a ceiling that rains flower petals when Nero claps. He calls it a divine touch. You call it allergies. When Nero enters, the room holds its breath. He's wearing a purple cloak embroidered with stars. Subtle, as always. His cheeks glow with wine and self-confidence. He greets no one, because in his mind, everyone already exists in a state of greeting him. You take your place among the concubines, pretending your pulse isn't marching in sync with the drums. Musicians begin to play, and Nero beams as though Apollo himself had RSVP'd. He sweeps his arm dramatically. "Tonight," he declares, "we celebrate the greatness of Rome." No one asks which part. The empire's been burning metaphorically for years. The literal version just hasn't caught up yet. As laughter and lyres fill the air, you raise your cup, smile on cue, and whisper a private toast under your breath. To survival and to keeping. One's head attached another night. The banquet hasn't even finished digesting before Nero decides it's time for art. Of course, he means his art, the only kind officially recognized by Rome since, well, Nero. The torches dim. Musicians scuttle into formation like terrified beetles. Senators straighten up, concubines freeze, and slaves vanish into corners. Nero stands, glowing in purple silk, crown tilted like a man who truly believes Olympus is just a staircase away. He lifts his hands. "Tonight," he announces, "the gods speak through me." Which is impressive, considering most gods have been avoiding Rome lately. The lyres begin their cautious melody, something between divine hymn and public apology. Nero closes his eyes, sways dramatically, and starts to sing. The song is supposed to be about Orpheus descending into the underworld for love. But somehow, it's mostly about Nero's own brilliance. You've heard worse. Mostly because you've also heard this exact song 27 times. Every verse lasts long enough for a small rebellion to form and be crushed. As his voice cracks on the word immortal, you clap, softly, reverently, and, most importantly, preemptively. The senators follow your lead, a few seconds too slow, and applause becomes insubordination. Timing is everything in Nero's Rome, even for your hands. He opens his eyes, basking in the glow of terrified admiration. "Art," he says breathlessly, "is truth." You nod, so is gravity, but one seems more consistent. Then, without warning, he declares, "Let there be light." Servants rush to release hundreds of doves carrying tiny lanterns. One catches fire mid-air, igniting its feathers. Nero doesn't notice. Everyone else pretends not to. You just add smells of roast bird to tonight's list of sensory experiences. When the performance finally ends, the silence is thick and trembling. Then Nero smiles, and the entire room erupts in applause loud enough to wake Jupiter himself. People shout praise, weep, even faint for effect. He bows to himself, deeply, majestically. "The gods," he murmurs, "approve." You force your smile wider, hoping the gods' approval covers collateral damage. Because in Nero's Rome, art doesn't imitate life, it replaces it. Dinner under Nero isn't just a meal, it's a test of endurance. The banquet room is already groaning under the weight of food that could feed half of Rome. Platters of roasted peacocks, figs stuffed with honey, eels marinated in wine, and something that might have once been legal to eat. Slaves move silently between tables like haunted waiters, refilling goblets faster than guests can panic. You take your place among the concubines, pretending the smell of roasted flamingo doesn't make your soul leave your body. The senators across the table are already sweating, terrified of being noticed or, worse, ignored. Nero sits at the head, wearing a garland of flowers like a man convinced nature itself adores him. He's glowing with the satisfaction of a god who hasn't yet realized he's mortal. He raises his cup. "To Rome," he declares, as if Rome isn't currently on fire somewhere, metaphorically or otherwise. Everyone echoes the toast, because the alternative is execution. The food is endless, a grotesque parade of luxury. The emperor insists on sampling everything. He eats like a man auditioning for divine status, slowly, dramatically, as if chewing were a sacrament. Each bite demands applause. Each belch is a philosophical statement. You nibble on a fig, careful not to enjoy it too much. Pleasure is suspicious here. It implies independence. Across from you, a senator's wife laughs too loudly at one of Nero's jokes. Within seconds, everyone joins in, the sound of synchronized fear disguised as mirth. Midway through the feast, Nero decides to entertain. He calls for dancers, men painted in gold, women draped in nothing but pearls. The performance is hypnotic, decadent, and vaguely threatening. It's art, Nero style, expensive, excessive, and impossible to leave. He leans toward you at one point, eyes glassy with wine. "Do you believe," he says softly, "that I was born for greatness?" You smile. The trained, perfect smile of someone who has rehearsed this exact moment 100 times. "Caesar," you whisper, "you define greatness." He grins, satisfied. You exhale, pretending the air isn't thick with tension, and the smell of decay disguised as perfume. The banquet continues. The laughter grows louder, the wine sweeter, the danger sharper. And as golden petals rain from the ceiling, you realize this isn't dinner. It's Rome eating itself. After the banquet comes the part everyone dreads, the entertainment. In Nero's world, games are a flexible concept. Sometimes it's chariot races, sometimes it's music. Tonight, it's both, because moderation died around the same time as Nero's sanity. The palace courtyard has been transformed into a miniature arena. Torches burn bright, casting long, twitching shadows across the marble. Senators, courtiers, and concubines line the edges, pretending this is normal. Which, to be fair, it kind of is by now. The first act is harmless enough. Jugglers balancing flaming torches while reciting poetry about Nero's divine beauty. You've never seen a man smile with more teeth and less soul. Then come the gladiators, hand-picked for their skill and complete lack of will to live. The emperor waves lazily, and the fight begins. Steel clashes, the crowd gasps, and you sip watered wine like it's a tranquilizer. You've learned that showing emotion here is risky. Too horrified, and you're accused of weakness. Too thrilled, and you're accused of bloodlust. The correct expression is mildly impressed existential dread. When the final blow lands, Nero stands and applauds himself for hosting such marvellous theatre. Rome, he declares, is a civilization of spectacle. You resist the urge to ask if that includes the part where Rome is also bankrupt. Next, Nero decides to participate. Never a good sign. He strides into the arena, wearing a tunic that glitters like a fever dream. Tonight, he announces, I shall reenact the labours of Hercules. The collective silence that follows could power an empire. He begins with a Nemean lion, represented by a confused palace guard wearing a fur cloak and deep regret. Nero swings a wooden club, misses dramatically, then declares victory anyway. The crowd roars on cue. Even the gods probably wince. By the time he finishes defeating the Hydra, a pile of snakes made of ribbons, the audience is exhausted from fear-induced enthusiasm. You clap until your palms sting, praying the performance ends before someone dies for real. Nero bows deeply, sweating and radiant. Rome, he proclaims, has witnessed greatness. And in a way he's right. It's just the kind of greatness that makes history textbooks sigh. When the festivities finally die down, the most dangerous part of the night begins. The summons. A trembling servant appears, eyes fixed on the floor. The emperor requests your presence. The sentence sounds polite, but everyone knows it's a death sentence wrapped in velvet. You rise, smile like it's an honour, and follow him through corridors glowing with lamplight and menace. The Domus Aurea is quieter now, but not peaceful. The marble walls echo every footstep like the palace itself is gossiping. The scent of wine, incense, and burning oil clings to everything. Rome's idea of foreplay. You pass statues of gods who all look vaguely disinterested, which feels appropriate. By the time you reach Nero's private chamber, your pulse is rehearsing its own tragedy. The doors open to a room so extravagant it could bankrupt a province. The bed alone could seat a Senate meeting. Every surface gleams with gold, ivory, or the vague suggestion of guilt. Nero reclines in silk, half drunk, fully self-absorbed. A lyre rests nearby. Proof that even in bed he's never off stage. He gestures lazily for you to approach. You do, with the same energy as someone walking toward an open volcano. He studies you the way an artist studies marble, as if wondering whether you'll make a good statue later. He talks first, of course, about philosophy, destiny, his voice, mostly his voice. You nod in the right places, murmur agreement, and pray to every god you can name that he doesn't ask for an opinion. Nero doesn't want truth. He wants echo. Then comes the ritual. Slow, deliberate, and filled with dramatic pauses that would make a playwright weep. To him, intimacy is theatre. You play your part perfectly. The devoted muse, the awed admirer, the woman who doesn't remember she had a life before this bed. When it's over, Nero sighs like a man who just conquered Gaul. You understand me, he says softly. You smile, the way all survivors do. Because in this palace, Affection isn't love, it's choreography. And tonight, you danced well enough to live another dawn. When Nero finally falls asleep, it's like watching a lion drift off after eating the entire savannah. He snores softly, blissfully unaware that half the empire wants him dead. You lie still beside him, afraid that even your heartbeat might offend the gods. Or worse, the Emperor's dreams. The room glows faintly from dying candles. The air smells of spiced wine and smoke, heavy enough to drown in. Around you, everything is perfection. Velvet curtains, carved ivory, the faint hum of fountains outside. And yet, somehow, it all feels like the inside of a coffin lined with gold. You turn your head just enough to study him. Rome's golden monster. His face in sleep is almost peaceful, almost human. The kind of man who might have been kind if he hadn't been raised by ambition and applause. For a brief moment, pity sneaks in. Then you remember the screams you heard 2 nights ago and let that feeling die quietly. Sleep won't come to you. It rarely does. Too many thoughts, too many ghosts. You think of your home, of the river where you used to wash clothes, the sound of laughter that didn't cost your soul. You were supposed to be a wife, maybe a mother. Instead, you're a decoration in the Emperor's bedtime mythology. Outside, Rome breathes unevenly. Carriages creak, dogs bark, and distant revelers sing songs about a peace that doesn't exist. Somewhere, a building collapses, and you wonder if that's just another metaphor for the empire itself. You whisper a prayer, barely audible. Not to Venus or Jupiter, they're useless in this city, but to Fortuna, the goddess of luck. Just let me see morning, you murmur. I don't need happiness. Just daylight. Beside you, Nero stirs. His arm drapes across you with the affection of ownership, not warmth. You lie still, eyes open, heart counting the seconds until he slips back into dreams where he's still adored. You've learned that love in this palace isn't about tenderness. It's about timing, knowing when to smile, when to flatter, and when to breathe. You stare into the candlelight and whisper the truth that no one dares say aloud. Rome's not burning, it's just finally showing its reflection. Dawn in Nero's palace doesn't arrive softly. It slithers in, golden and cruel. Sunlight creeps across the marble like a thief, spilling over mosaics, goblets, and the emperor himself, who sleeps like a man confident the gods are still on his payroll. You rise slowly, careful not to wake him. The sheets are warm, perfumed, and faintly sticky with spilled wine. Remnants of another night that looked like glory and smelled like exhaustion. The air hums with silence, the kind that exists only after chaos. You breathe it in like a secret. Servants enter quietly, heads bowed. They move around Nero's bed like priests tending a sacred fire, washing, folding, pretending. One of them meets your eyes for half a second, then looks away. No one here acknowledges survival. It's bad luck. You wrap yourself in a thin robe and step toward the balcony. Rome stretches below, vast and indifferent, smoke rising from distant chimneys, temples catching the first light, the faint chatter of a city pretending it isn't built on bones. Somewhere down there, bakers are kneading dough, merchants are shouting prices, and children are chasing stray dogs. Normal life, miraculously untouched by divine insanity. For a moment you envy them. Their mornings start with bread, not strategy. Their fears are small enough to name. You glance back at Nero, the ruler of everything, the prisoner of nothing. Even asleep, he looks theatrical. His hand clutches a golden goblet like a man afraid someone might forget to worship him in his dreams. You wonder if power always looks this pathetic in daylight. You turn back to the view. The breeze from the Tiber carries the faint scent of ash, the perfume of Rome. The city never truly burns, it just keeps smouldering. Like him, like you. You whisper a quiet, invisible laugh. You survived another night. That's the closest thing to victory in this palace. You'll smile again at breakfast, applaud another song, and flatter another delusion. Because in Nero's world, survival is rebellion. and as the sunlight finally touches your face, you do what no one in the Empire dares to do out loud. You exhale, and for one fragile heartbeat, you feel free. In the Norse world, marriage was not a matter of love, but of legacy. It was an alliance between families, a treaty forged beneath the eyes of gods and ancestors. When a man and woman were bound together, so too were their clans, their herds, their weapons, and their honour. A wedding could bring peace between feuding families or ignite a new blood feud that lasted generations. Marriage was never private. It was war, wealth, and worship rolled into one sacred ritual. The gods themselves set the pattern. Odin and Frigg ruled together as the divine model of husband and wife, she the silent keeper of secrets, he the restless wanderer. Freya, goddess of love and fertility, lent her blessing to the union, but her beauty was also a weapon in politics among gods and men. When a mortal couple wed, it was said their vows echoed those of the divine. Yet unlike the romances sung in later ages, these unions were practical, strategic, and often cold. A Norse bride was more than a woman. She was the key to inheritance. Her marriage could double a family's power or ruin it entirely. The groom's family had to prove worthiness through dowries, gifts, and solemn oaths. Gold was exchanged, but so were swords and land deeds. Every piece of silver symbolized responsibility. A man did not just marry a woman, he married her kin, her debts, and her ancestors' ghosts. The ceremony itself was only the visible tip of the pact. Beneath the mead hall's smoke and laughter, there lay tension. Would this alliance hold, or would treachery follow? The bride's family watched the groom's men for signs of arrogance. The groom's kin measured the bride's loyalty. For in Norse belief, marriage was a battlefield without blood, but not without casualties. Even the word giftarmal, meaning marriage, carried a sense of exchange, of giving and taking. It was less about romance and more about balance, the union of two bloodlines in pursuit of survival. The Norse understood that the world itself was born from sacrifice. So too was every marriage, a personal offering to fate, to family, and to the gods who watched from above, drinking their mead and smiling at human bargains. Before the mead was poured or the bride's hair was braided, there came the festarmal, the betrothal agreement. It was less a romantic promise and more a political negotiation, where silver spoke louder than love. Two families gathered, usually in the longhouse of the bride's kin, and the air was thick with smoke, tension, and pride. On one side sat the groom's family, armed not with axes but with offers. On the other, the bride's kin, defending her value as fiercely as they would defend their borders. At the heart of the discussion was the brudkaup, the bride purchase. It wasn't crude in their eyes. It was law, custom, and honour. The groom's family paid the munda, a sum that represented his ability to provide and protect. In return, the bride's family offered an heirloom dowry, livestock, jewellery, or land, often items that carried ancestral spirits and stories. Both sides understood this was no mere transaction. It was an exchange of fates. Once both families agreed on the terms, witnesses were called, often men of standing in the community, to ensure the deal would hold in the eyes of both people and gods. The agreement was sealed with handshakes, oaths, and sometimes a symbolic sharing of mead. From that moment, the woman was Festa Kona, the betrothed woman, bound by honour to her future husband. To break that promise without cause was a grave insult and could trigger blood vengeance. It's easy to imagine the young couple sitting silently through this ritual, barely glancing at each other. Personal affection had little place in these proceedings. The marriage was not theirs to design. It belonged to their families, their ancestors, and their clan's destiny. Yet once the agreement was struck, a strange anticipation filled the hall. The elders had spoken, and now the gods would watch. Some families held a modest feast after the festimal, where both clans toasted to prosperity and to a future filled with sons and strong harvests. Behind the laughter, however, lingered unspoken fears that the union might bring more storm than sunshine. But that was the Norse way. To bind lives together was to challenge fate itself, and no Viking ever shied from that gamble. In Norse weddings, the sword meant as much as the ring. It was more than a symbol. It was lineage made metal. When the groom arrived to claim his bride, he did not come empty-handed. In his right hand, he carried a sword, often the ancestral blade of his father or grandfather. This was no mere decoration. It was his proof of blood, his pledge of strength, and his unspoken warning to anyone who dared challenge the union. At the ceremony, the groom would hand this sword to his bride. She would hold it with both hands, feeling the cold iron that once shed blood for his family's honour. In return, she would present him with a new sword, freshly forged, a weapon to be wielded in their new life together. One blade symbolised ancestry, the other the future. It was as if the past and the unborn generations met in that exchange of steel. The sword also marked the bride's transformation. Before this moment, she was her father's daughter. After it, she was her husband's woman, not in the sense of ownership, but of protection and duty. She would carry her husband's ancestral sword during the ceremony, and sometimes keep it near her bed for the first nights of marriage, representing her guardianship of his honour and his lineage. These swords were often inscribed with runes, or blessed by a local godi, a pagan priest, to ensure the god's favour. Some bore the hammer of Thor carved into their hilts, invoking the protector of mankind. It was said that if the metal gleamed too brightly during the exchange, it foretold a strong union. If it dulled, the gods were displeased. In a society where peace was fleeting and every alliance could sour, the sword's presence reminded everyone that even marriage was a fragile truce. Every blade had its stories, of raids, vengeance, or loyalty. And now those stories passed to the bride's hands. As the guests watched the exchange, they saw more than two people marrying. They witnessed the forging of an alliance between past and present, family and fate. The sword gleamed, a silent witness that love in the north was always tempered with iron. No Norse wedding was complete without the braiding of the bride's hair, a ritual older than any saga and as sacred as the vows themselves. Before the ceremony, the women of her family gathered in the longhouse, their hands busy, their voices low. They took her loose maiden hair, a sign of freedom, and began to weave it into intricate braids. Each strand represented a thread of fate, binding her to her ancestors, to her husband, and to the Norns, the three goddesses who wove destiny itself. The act was both symbolic and emotional. A woman's hair was a powerful emblem of her identity and virtue. In Norse culture, an unmarried woman wore her hair long and unbound, but a wife's hair was braided or covered, showing discipline, maturity, and the shift from youth to responsibility. As the older women wove, they murmured blessings for fertility, prosperity, and peace in the hearth. They told her of the trials of marriage, the cold winters, the absence of husbands gone raiding, and the silence of waiting. Their words carried both warning and comfort. When the braiding was done, a delicate veil or circlet was placed atop her head. Sometimes it was adorned with herbs like thyme, rowan, or holly, plants believed to ward off dark spirits or jealous eyes. In richer families, gold threads were woven into the hair, glinting like sunlight in the smoky hall. It was said that Frigg herself blessed every bride through this act, whispering fate into her braids. Meanwhile, in another chamber, the groom prepared too. His hair was combed and bound, his beard oiled and perfumed with resin. His attendants tightened his belt and armed him with a ceremonial axe or sword, polished until it mirrored the firelight. For both bride and groom, appearance was not vanity but ritual, a declaration to gods and mortals alike that this union was sanctified by order, not chaos. When the bride finally stepped from the longhouse, her hair bound like a crown of woven gold, the crowd hushed. It wasn't just beauty they saw, it was transformation. She was no longer her father's daughter, nor a maiden of her clan. She was something new, something sacred, the living thread between generations, braided by fate itself. When the formal vows were spoken and the swords exchanged, the wedding feast began, a roaring celebration that could last for days. In the flicker of torchlight and the heavy scent of roasted meat, kin and strangers alike gathered to witness the merging of two clans. The feast was not mere indulgence. It was a public declaration that the gods, the ancestors, and the community all approved of this union. Without the feast, there was no true wedding, only an empty promise. Long wooden tables overflowed with food, roasted boar, salted fish, baked bread, and steaming cauldrons of stew thickened with barley. Horns of mead passed from hand to hand, each toast louder and bolder than the last. The bride and groom sat at the high seat, surrounded by elders, and every guest took turns to raise a horn in their honour. But each toast carried power, a kind of spoken magic. To wish the couple well was to bless them before the gods. To mock them, even in jest, could be seen as a curse. Skalds, or poets, stood to recite verses about the couple's lineage, bravery, and fortune. Laughter echoed through the hall, but beneath it all was formality. Each word spoken, each gesture, was laden with tradition. The sharing of mead was itself sacred, a symbol of unity and shared fate. The first horn was dedicated to Odin for wisdom, the second to Thor for strength and protection, and the third to Freya for love and fertility. During the feast, games were played, oaths were sworn, and challenges were issued. Some men might even duel in friendly combat to honour the bride's beauty or prove the groom's luck. These acts of bravado weren't just entertainment, they were tests of worth and omens for the marriage's success. As night deepened, the hall grew hazy with smoke and song. Guests danced, shouted, and occasionally brawled. Old grudges were settled, and new alliances formed across the benches. For in the Norse world, a wedding feast was never just about the couple. It was about the tribe. It bound people together through shared laughter, food, and firelight. And when the last horn was drained, it wasn't just a union of man and woman that had been forged. It was the reaffirmation of an entire people's will to endure. No Norse marriage was complete without divine witness. Before the feast began or during its height, the couple sought the blessing of the gods. For without their favour, even the richest dowry or strongest sword meant nothing. The Norse saw marriage as part of the cosmic balance, an echo of sacred unions among the gods themselves. Every vow was a whisper carried into the halls of Asgard, where Odin, Frigg, Thor, and Freya listened. The ritual varied by region, but the essence remained. The gods must be honoured, or the marriage would wither. The local godi, a priest or chieftain, led the ceremony before an altar adorned with carved idols. A small animal, often a goat or a boar, was sacrificed to Freya, god of fertility, whose blessing promised fruitful fields and children with strong bones. Its blood was caught in a wooden bowl, and a branch of evergreen, a symbol of life, was dipped into it, then sprinkled upon the couple, the guests, and the sacred fire. Next came Thor's hammer, or a symbolic version of it, placed upon the bride's lap. It was not a gesture of violence, but of protection and fertility. Just as Thor guarded Midgard, the hammer's presence was meant to guard the new household. The groom would then touch the hammer, signifying his duty to defend and provide. In that instant, he became not merely a husband, but a shield against chaos. The bride's prayers were directed to Freya, goddess of love and childbirth. She was asked to grant passion and patience, twin virtues of any lasting union. Some brides wore amber beads around their necks, known as Freya's tears, to invoke her favour. These were heirlooms passed down from mother to daughter, binding generations in silent devotion. When the offerings were done, the godi raised a horn of mead to the heavens and poured a portion onto the earth, a libation for the unseen spirits. The crowd would answer with a mighty cheer, as if Thor himself had thundered approval. The couple then clasped hands over the altar, sealing their fates under divine watch. For the Norse, the gods were not distant myths. They were guests at the table, witnesses to every oath, and silent judges of every kiss. When the gods had been honoured and the feasting swelled, the moment came for the bridal procession, a ritual journey that marked the bride's passage from one household to another. In the Norse world, this was not merely a walk. It was a symbolic crossing between lives, a farewell to her kin, and a bold step into her husband's fate. The path was sacred, lined with watchers, torches, and the murmurs of song. At dawn, the bride was led from her father's home, her braids crowned with a circlet of herbs and gold. She was flanked by her kinswomen, who carried small lamps or candles to light her way, a gesture of protection against dark spirits. Ahead rode armed men, the groom's companions, waiting to escort her to the new homestead. These processions could stretch for miles, with horses draped in cloth, banners fluttering, and the steady rhythm of hooves echoing across the fjord valleys. The bride's dowry followed behind in wagons, chests of woven linens, carved wooden bowls, silver jewellery, and heirloom weapons. Even her slaves or servants walked among the procession, for she brought with her the wealth and prestige of her lineage. The groom awaited her at his hall, standing before the threshold with his sword at his side and a cup of mead in his hand. When she arrived, the bride's attendants dismounted first, and then she was led forward to meet her husband. The groom offered her the cup, a ceremonial drink of mead, sweetened with honey and herbs. She drank and then passed it back to him. This simple act, called the bridal toast, sealed their public bond before the community. Mead was sacred to the Norse, a gift of the gods that symbolized wisdom and harmony. To share it was to promise cooperation, even in hardship. Finally, the groom took the bride by the hand and led her into the hall. At that moment, the torches were raised, and the guests erupted into cheers. Music filled the air, flutes, drums, and horns echoing through the timber beams. For everyone present, this was the climax of the day. The merging of two clans witnessed not just by mortals, but by ancestors smiling from beyond the veil of firelight. When the last song faded and the torches burned low, the Norse wedding turned to its most private ritual, the bridal night, known as Sengahusin. Though cloaked in intimacy, it was not an affair of secrecy. The consummation of marriage was a public matter, for without it, the union had no legal or spiritual binding. It was the moment where vows turned into legacy, where two bloodlines mingled beneath the silent gaze of gods and ancestors. Before the couple withdrew, guests escorted them to the bridal chamber with raucous cheers and laughter. Some threw flower petals, others banged their cups, shouting blessings that blurred the line between humour and superstition. This was no time for modesty. The louder the crowd, the greater the fortune. The procession into the bridal room symbolised the community's approval, a reminder that this marriage served the clan as much as the heart. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The chamber glowed with the light of candles and the smell of resin and smoke. A fire crackled in the hearth, a symbol of home, watched over by Frigg, the goddess of domestic harmony. Upon the bed lay the groom's ancestral sword, placed between husband and wife for the first night. It stood for protection and purity, a reminder that the marriage began not in desire, but in honour. Only after the morning sun rose could it be removed, signalling that the couple had fulfilled their union. Some regions included a curious ritual. Witnesses, often family elders, might remain outside the door to confirm the night had been spent together. As invasive as it sounds, it was meant to protect both parties, proof against false claims or broken vows. In the morning, the couple would emerge, greeted by shouts of triumph and the toasts of kin. The bridal night carried divine echoes. Freya and Freya, gods of fertility, were invoked through quiet prayers. The mead the couple shared before lying down was not just drink, but sacred elixir, believed to bless their union with children and good fortune. For a Viking, love was not measured by softness, but by endurance. And in that quiet chamber, where sword and flame met flesh and fate, the new household began, bound by honour, sealed by fire and witnessed by the gods themselves. When the laughter faded and the mead horns ran dry, the true weight of marriage began. In Norse culture, the wedding was not the end of a story, it was the start of a dynasty. Every marriage, whether between chieftains or simple farmers, carried the same expectation: to build, to endure, and to leave behind something worthy of remembrance. The morning after the feast, gifts were exchanged once more. The groom might present his bride with land, jewellery, or livestock, symbols of trust and permanence. The bride, in turn, would bring her dowry into the new household, helping to establish their wealth and independence. Together they managed the homestead, a miniature kingdom ruled jointly. The Norse saw husband and wife not as opposites but as complements. He the shield, she the hearth. He defended the walls, she kept the fire alive. Marriage transformed a man's status too. A bachelor was rootless. A married man had a bloodline and a legacy. He could claim land, inherit titles, and sit in council among elders. His children, born of a union blessed by gods and witnessed by kin, became the vessels of his memory. For a Viking, immortality did not come from temples or tombs, but from stories told about one's descendants. A woman's power grew in quieter, but no less formidable ways. As the keeper of the keys, both literal and symbolic, she managed the household's wealth. Her word carried authority when her husband was at sea or war. Widows could inherit property, lead farms, and even arrange new marriages within the clan. In sagas, the wisest women were often those who turned their wedding vows into strategy, ensuring their family's survival long after their husbands were gone. Even centuries later, echoes of these unions lingered in custom and song. Every Norse wedding, whether humble or grand, was an act of defiance against the cold and chaos of their world. It said, "We endure." Beneath the braids, the swords, and the roaring feasts, there was something deeply human, a yearning to be remembered, to belong, to bind one life to another against the endless winter. And so, in the flicker of the hearth fire, every marriage became what the Norse valued most, a legacy strong enough to outlast the snow. In Japan, the skin was never just skin. It was a sacred surface where identity, endurance, and defiance were carved in silence. The art of Irezumi, meaning to insert ink, turned the human body into a living scroll. Each design carried a story that could not be spoken aloud, tales of loyalty, love, vengeance, and destiny, all etched in the deep rhythm of the needle. To be tattooed was not merely to decorate oneself, it was to commit to a legend that would follow you into death and beyond. The roots of Irezumi stretch far into prehistory. Archaeologists have found clay figurines from the Jomon period, over 10,000 years old, bearing mysterious patterns on their faces and bodies. Whether these represented tattoos or body paint remains uncertain, but the message was clear. Even in ancient Japan, marking the skin was a spiritual act, a bridge between the mortal body and the unseen world. As centuries passed, these marks evolved from tribal symbols into refined art. By the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, tattooing had transformed into something grander, something dangerous, an art of the forbidden. While the ruling samurai class prized discipline, purity, and outward modesty, the common people, labourers, craftsmen, firemen, and gamblers, turned to Irezumi as an act of silent rebellion. Their skin became their kimono. Beneath simple clothing, they carried entire worlds, dragons coiled across shoulders, koi fish swimming up spines, tigers crouching beneath ribs. The ink turned the body into a map of emotion and myth. The process was long, brutal, and sacred. Using tebari, the traditional hand-poked method, the tattoo master would dip a bundle of needles into ink and drive them into the skin stroke by stroke. The pain was excruciating, but it was also purifying. Enduring it was proof of discipline, of courage, of belonging. When the last stroke was done, what emerged was more than art. It was transformation. A man could walk into the studio as a labourer and emerge as a living legend. His skin told of gods, beasts, and battles. His body, once blank, had become a temple. In the world of Irezumi, beauty was born not from ease, but from endurance. Every drop of blood was a signature, every scar, a vow. Before Irezumi became an art form revered for its beauty, it was a mark of shame. In early Japan, tattooing began not as decoration, but as punishment. During the Kofun period and well into the Edo era, criminals were branded with indelible symbols, lines across the forehead, rings on the arms, or black marks on the face. This was called bokei, the tattoo of crime. Each mark declared guilt more loudly than words. A thief might bear 1 stripe, a murderer 3. There was no hiding it. The body became a permanent confession. Yet what began as a tool of humiliation would, over centuries, transform into something powerful, even defiant. The criminals and outcasts, stripped of honor by law, reclaimed the very mark meant to destroy them. They covered those crude tattoos with elaborate designs, dragons, phoenixes, koi, and waves, symbols of courage, rebirth, and strength. What was once a scar of shame became a badge of survival. By the mid-Edo period, tattooing had moved from punishment to protest art. The working class, the chonin, were forbidden by law from wearing luxurious clothing, silk, or bright colours reserved for the samurai elite. But there was one place the government couldn't regulate: the skin beneath. Beneath plain robes, the labourers hid explosions of colour: crimson dragons, golden carp, blue oni demons, and black waves that rippled across their backs. Their hidden tattoos mocked the restrictions of the Tokugawa shogunate. Firefighters, dock workers, and gamblers soon adopted Irezumi as a mark of bravery. The Edo firefighters, or hikeshi, wore nothing but loincloths and tattoos as they battled flames, their bodies shining with sweat and mythic creatures. The ink became their armour, their declaration that pain and duty were intertwined. Authorities tried to suppress the practice, banning tattooing entirely in 1872 as Japan sought to appear civilized to the West. But outlawing it only deepened its allure. The more forbidden it became, the more meaningful it was to those who wore it. Thus, what began as a mark of disgrace evolved into a symbol of rebellion and honor. In Irezumi, the punished became the powerful. The ink that once shamed them became their redemption, proof that even beneath oppression, art could bloom, fierce and unyielding. To understand Irezumi, one must understand the men who created it, the horishi, tattoo masters who turned pain into poetry. Their work was not a trade, but a lifelong calling, often passed from master to apprentice in secret. There were no schools, no public signs, and no shortcuts. Apprentices spent years cleaning tools, preparing ink, and observing in silence before ever touching human skin. The art demanded patience, humility, and a reverence for both beauty and suffering. The horishi's most sacred tool was the tabori, literally hand carving. Instead of electric machines, they used long bamboo or metal rods tipped with bundles of fine needles. Dipped in rich black ink or vibrant pigments made from crushed minerals, these needles were rhythmically driven into the skin by hand. Each puncture was a heartbeat, each movement a meditation. The process was slow and merciless. A full-body Irezumi could take hundreds of hours over years to complete. A true master could read the skin like a map. He knew how it stretched, how it bled, how it aged. He carved with instinct, knowing that each stroke had permanence. Many horishi carried names passed down through generations, such as Horiyoshi, Horimasa, or Horitomo, titles that reflected not ego, but lineage. Their studios were often hidden in alleys or small apartments, marked only by whispered reputation. To be chosen by a respected horishi was an honor and a test of endurance. The ritual began with a design consultation, where the master would study not just the client's body, but their spirit. What was their story? Their burden? Their strength? From this, a design emerged, not from vanity, but from meaning. The horishi was part artist, part psychologist, part priest. As the needle pierced flesh, the pain became part of the art. The client entered a trance-like state, breathing with the rhythm of the strokes. It was said that the body screamed, but the soul listened. When finished, the skin held more than ink. It held transformation. The client walked away not merely tattooed, but reborn, carrying a story told through blood, colour, and devotion. In the world of Irezumi, every masterpiece demanded a price, and that price was pain. Every Irezumi design carries meaning deeper than the ink that shapes it. These were not random decorations, they were prayers, warnings, and reflections of the soul. To the Japanese, the creatures and gods of mythology were alive, walking between the worlds of spirit and man. To wear them on one's skin was to invite their power and their burden. Among the most revered of all was the dragon, or Ryu. Unlike Western dragons that breathe fire and destroy, the Japanese dragon was a protector, a bringer of wisdom and rain. A full-bodied dragon wrapping around the torso symbolized strength and balance, a guardian spirit coiled around the heart. The dragon's pearl, often inked near its claws or mouth, represented enlightenment, a treasure that could only be earned through suffering. Next came the koi fish, swimming upstream against waterfalls and storms. The koi was a symbol of perseverance, courage, and transformation, born from an ancient legend that a koi who swam up the Yellow River and conquered the waterfall at Dragon's Gate became a dragon itself. For men of the Edo underworld, the koi was their mirror, defiant, unyielding, and destined to rise despite impossible odds. Tigers embodied ferocity and protection, believed to ward off evil spirits and disease. Phoenixes, or Ho-Oh, stood for rebirth and immortality, their feathers often intertwined with flames or clouds. The snake, or Hebi, symbolized both danger and renewal, a shedding of the old self. And then there were the Oni, horned demons from Japanese folklore. To wear one was not to invite evil, but to master it, to show that the wearer had conquered their inner darkness. Every line of an Irezumi piece had intention. The placement of the design mattered as much as the image itself. Dragons across the back symbolized protection. Koi swimming up the arm meant struggle toward success. Waves across the shoulders represented the unpredictable nature of life. Together, these motifs formed a visual language, one that spoke of power, loss, endurance, and transformation. In Irezumi, the body became a myth made flesh. The wearer did not simply own the image, they became it. Beneath the skin, dragons slept, koi swam, and demons smiled, all whispering the same truth. Pain is temporary, but art and spirit endure forever. In the art of Irezumi, the body is not a blank space. It is a sacred landscape. Each curve, muscle, and joint becomes part of the composition. The Japanese tattoo is not meant to be viewed in fragments, but as a continuous story that unfolds across the skin like an illustrated scroll. When the body moves, the story breathes. When it ages, the story deepens. The design of a full-body Irezumi, known as a horimono, was meticulously planned by the master. It could take months to complete the drawing before the first needle ever touched flesh. The horishi would map the body from the neck down to the thighs, creating an unbroken visual symphony. Dragons twisting down spines, koi swimming along ribs, cherry blossoms falling across shoulders, and waves cresting over hips. Every line followed the body's natural flow. To interrupt that flow was to break the harmony. Certain spaces were always left untouched: the hands, the neck, and the face. In Edo period Japan, tattoos were hidden beneath clothing, visible only in moments of intimacy or ritual. When a man stripped for the bathhouse or the festival, his secret world was revealed in bursts of colour and myth. In this way, Irezumi existed between two realms: the public and the private, the ordinary and the divine. The back was the canvas of choice, vast and flat like a painter's screen. The chest, meanwhile, symbolized courage. To tattoo it was to prove endurance, for the pain near the ribs was intense. The arms and thighs were often used for supporting imagery, wind, clouds, water, that gave motion and balance to the central motif. To wear a full-body horimono was not simply fashion, it was a rite of passage. The process demanded months of agony and discipline. Clients would endure hundreds of sessions, returning to the horishi again and again, offering both their body and their spirit to the art. By the time the final line was drawn, the wearer had undergone transformation. When clothed, he was just another man. But when the robe slipped from his shoulders, he became something mythic, a living scroll of gods and monsters, inked in silence and bound forever to his story. To the untrained eye, the colours of Irezumi are simply beautiful. But to those who understand, every hue bleeds with meaning. Every shade has a soul. The palette of Japanese tattooing was born not from luxury, but from struggle, patience, and chemistry, older than memory. These colours weren't chosen for style. They were chosen for spirit. The base of all Irezumi was black ink, called sumi. It was made from soot, collected from burning pine wood, and mixed with water or animal glue. The master prepared it carefully, grinding the pigment on a stone until it shimmered faintly blue under the light. Black formed the foundation, the bones of the image. Without it, colour had no anchor, no shadow. The outlines carved by black sumi defined the rhythm of the body itself, like calligraphy written on living parchment. Once the structure was complete, the colours followed. Red symbolised strength, life, and protection from evil. Blue and indigo were calm and noble, like deep water. Green represented renewal, youth, and the unstoppable return of spring. Yellow and orange carried the fire of courage, while purple marked wisdom, wealth, and spiritual power. These pigments were rare, ground from minerals and plants, and mixing them demanded skill. A single mistake could stain unevenly, or fade with time. Yet colour in Irezumi was not merely surface, it was essence. The placement of hues mattered as much as the symbols themselves. A dragon might bear a blue body to show serenity, but red flames might curl around its claws to reveal the fire within. A koi painted in orange and gold symbolised transformation through struggle, while a phoenix inked in crimson spoke of death and rebirth. Even the pain of colour was part of the ritual. The deeper the tone, the longer the needle lingered. Red, in particular, was agony. The pigment had to be pressed again and again until the skin wept. But those who endured it said the pain changed them. The colours seemed to seep beyond the flesh into the spirit. When the work was finished, the result was not static art, but a breathing canvas. The colours caught light and shadow as the wearer moved, shimmering like silk in motion. To live with Irezumi was to carry an eternal painting, one that faded only when the flesh itself returned to dust. For all its artistry, Irezumi lived under the shadow of stigma. To the authorities, it was a mark of savagery, an embarrassment in a nation striving for modernity. In 1872, during the Meiji Restoration, Japan opened its ports to the Western world. Eager to prove itself civilized, the government banned tattooing entirely, branding it as barbaric, primitive, and shameful. Overnight, the horishi became outlaws, their studios hidden behind paper doors, their needles moving in silence. But beauty thrives in defiance. The ban only gave Irezumi more power. The art slipped underground, practiced in bathhouses, inns, and secret chambers. Tattoo masters passed their skills in whispers, their clients entering under night's cover. What was once decoration now became rebellion. To be tattooed was to reject society's hypocrisy, to embrace something raw and ancient beneath the polished veneer of modern Japan. Foreigners, ironically, were fascinated. Sailors, travellers, and diplomats sought out these forbidden artists, returning home with dragons coiled across their arms or koi swimming down their backs. The very thing Japan tried to hide became the image the world admired, the exotic ink of mystery and discipline. Yet within Japan, the stigma deepened. The government associated tattoos with the Yakuza, the criminal underworld. Full-body Irezumi, once a spiritual statement, became a sign of power, loyalty, and fear among gang members. The tattoos served as both armor and oath, each mark representing rank, sacrifice, and brotherhood. The media soon conflated all tattooed bodies with crime, erasing centuries of culture under one shadow. Even today, many public baths, gyms, and beaches in Japan ban tattooed visitors. A lingering echo of that Meiji-era shame survives. A fear not of ink itself, but of what it represents. Defiance, individuality, and refusal to conform. And yet, despite bans, whispers, and judgment, Irezumi never died. It adapted, survived, and endured. Just as the koi swims upstream, just as the dragon ascends through storm, to be tattooed in Japan still carries weight. It is not fashion, not trend. It is statement. It says, I choose my path. Irezumi's beauty lies in this paradox. It is both condemned and immortal. It remains forbidden, yet it defines what cannot be tamed, the Japanese soul's quiet rebellion beneath the skin. By the 20th century, Irezumi had become inseparable from the image of the Yakuza, Japan's organized crime families. Though tattooing long predated them, the underworld adopted it as a language of loyalty, suffering, and brotherhood. To wear full-body ink was to mark oneself as separate from society, a man who had chosen exile in exchange for freedom. The tattoos became both armor and confession, declaring a life lived by its own code. The process of being tattooed was a test. In the Yakuza, a recruit might spend years saving money and courage before stepping into the Horoshi's parlor. The tattoo was done slowly, over countless sessions, using the hand-poked tabori technique. There was no anesthesia. The pain was the point. Every thrust of the needle proved devotion to the clan, to the code, to the path chosen. To endure it was to earn respect. The imagery reflected the Yakuza's philosophy: dragons for power, koi for perseverance, cherry blossoms for the fleeting beauty of life, and hanya masks, twisted female demons, to warn of betrayal and jealousy. These tattoos were not random decorations, but moral symbols, lessons carved in color. The full suit of ink, called Irezumi Shozoku, covered the body from shoulder to thigh, stopping just before the wrists and neck. This allowed the Yakuza to wear business suits without revealing the art beneath, a double life of elegance and menace. To the public, these tattoos inspired fear. To the wearer, they were meditation. The pain was purification, the art, discipline. Many Yakuza spoke of their tattoos as the skin of resolve, a promise never to betray their brothers, no matter the cost. Ironically, while Irezumi was outlawed and despised, it survived because of the very men deemed criminal. The Yakuza kept the Horishi in business, ensuring the art's techniques, inks, and legends were never lost. They became its secret patrons, preserving a centuries-old craft the government sought to erase. But Irezumi's connection to the Yakuza came at a price. It cemented its reputation as forbidden, dangerous, and untouchable. The ink that once symbolized spiritual endurance became the language of outlaws. Yet within that darkness, Irezumi retained its ancient essence: courage, loyalty, and the beauty found only through pain. In the modern age, Irezumi stands at a crossroads, part relic, part revolution. What was once hidden in the shadows of bathhouses and criminal brotherhoods is slowly resurfacing as Japan's most misunderstood art form. Across the world, tattoo enthusiasts revere Irezumi as a discipline of precision and symbolism unmatched by Western styles. Yet in Japan, its heartbeat remains quiet, steady, proud, and stubbornly alive beneath the surface. After World War II, during the American occupation, the tattoo ban was briefly lifted. Western soldiers flocked to Japanese artists, fascinated by the craftsmanship. Masters like Horiyoshi II and Horiyoshi III carried the tradition forward, reviving classical motifs with renewed reverence. These men were more than artists. They were historians with needles. Their studios became sanctuaries where pain and patience intertwined, where the old gods of ink refused to die. In recent decades, a new generation has emerged, blending old methods with modern sensibilities. Some use electric machines, others still swear by the ancient Tebori hand-poking technique. The designs remain faithful to tradition, dragons twisting in blue smoke, koi shimmering in orange currents, cranes flying through waves of ink. But the meaning has evolved. For many today, Irezumi is not rebellion, but heritage. It's a quiet declaration. This is who I am, and this is where I come from. Still, stigma lingers. Tattooed travellers are often turned away from onsen, public baths, gyms, and even beaches. Employers frown upon visible ink, and families sometimes hide tattooed relatives from public eyes. But the younger generations, artists, musicians, and free spirits, are reclaiming it, stripping away fear and returning to reverence. Beyond Japan, Irezumi has achieved near-mythic status. Western tattooists study its flow, its philosophy of balance and storytelling. Museums now display ancient woodblock prints of tattooed heroes from Edo times. The once forbidden art is finally recognized as high culture, disciplined, elegant, and deeply spiritual. And yet, true Irezumi remains something more than fashion. It is patience embodied, pain sanctified, beauty earned. It survives because the skin remembers, because the ink, once carved, cannot lie. In every line of a dragon, every wave, every blossom, lives Japan's eternal paradox. Restraint and rebellion, shame and glory, suffering and grace, all flowing together beneath the skin. The Yakuza were not born in boardrooms or back alleys. They were born in exile. In 17th century Japan, under the Tokugawa shogunate, peace reigned for the first time in centuries. The endless wars that had defined the samurai age were over. With no battles left to fight, thousands of warriors became ronin, masterless, jobless, and dangerous men adrift in a society that no longer needed them. The shogunate imposed strict social hierarchies, dividing people into rigid classes: samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants. Anyone outside those ranks, wanderers, peddlers, gamblers, and beggars, was cast to the bottom, branded as the hinin, non-persons. From these outcasts rose two distinct groups, the tekiya and the bakuto, the peddlers and the gamblers. The tekiya travelled from village to village selling trinkets, medicine, or stolen goods, often setting up makeshift stalls during festivals. They were looked down upon by society, but tolerated because they provided things no one else would. Over time, the strongest among them organised the trade, setting rules, collecting dues, and defending their stalls from rivals. In return, they offered protection to the weak for a price. The bakuto lived differently. They gathered on riverbanks, bridges, and back streets, playing forbidden dice games known as chohan. The odds were always against the house, but the thrill of chance kept men coming back. Like the tekiya, the bakuto formed their own brotherhoods, with strict codes of loyalty and punishment. A gambler's honour mattered more than his fortune. Betrayal was paid in blood. These small bands would become the ancestors of Japan's future syndicates. Both groups existed outside the law yet maintained a strange order. They developed their own hierarchies, bosses called oyabun, fathers, and subordinates called kobun, children. This oyabun-kobun relationship became the spiritual spine of the Yakuza, loyalty in place of legality, family in place of state. By the late 1600s, the tekiya controlled markets across Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto, while the bakuto spread through the countryside, running gambling dens and protecting travellers. In a world that rejected them, they created one of their own, a society bound by tattoos, blades, and honour. The samurai had lost their swords, but in the shadows of peace, a new kind of warrior emerged, loyal not to a lord, but to the code of the underworld. In the bustling streets of Edo, where merchants shouted and paper lanterns glowed against the night, two underworlds flourished in silence, that of the tekiya, the peddlers, and the bakuto, the gamblers. They were the lifeblood of Japan's black markets, born from necessity and exclusion. To the ruling samurai class, these people were filth, parasites feeding on the edges of order. But to the poor, they were familiar faces, offering goods, entertainment, and a sense of belonging in a rigid society that had no place for them. The tekiya were wanderers by trade. They sold everything from cheap combs and herbs to stolen weapons and smuggled goods. Travelling from village to village, they became experts in survival and deception. Many disguised themselves as monks or merchants to avoid suspicion. Over time, they began organising themselves into guilds, each led by an oyabun, a father figure who offered protection, discipline, and opportunity. The tekiya hierarchy mirrored that of samurai clans. Loyalty was rewarded, betrayal punished without mercy. During temple fairs and seasonal festivals, the tekiya transformed entire streets into living bazaars. They controlled the stalls, rented out spaces, and kept peace, or enforced it with clubs. Their presence was both welcomed and feared. By the mid-17th century, some tekiya had grown powerful enough to negotiate directly with local magistrates. In exchange for keeping order and collecting fees, they were granted licenses to operate legally. Ironically, the government that despised them ended up relying on them to maintain control over the common folk. The bakuto, meanwhile, lived in a different world, a darker one. Their dens were hidden behind tea houses, barns, or boats, where dice clattered in the shadows. The word Yakuza itself came from their world. Yakuza, a losing hand in the card game Oicho Kabu, 8-9-3. A worthless combination. The name stuck, symbolising society's losers who refused to disappear. Though gambling was outlawed, the bakuto's networks thrived. They offered loans, collected debts, and enforced their own justice with blades instead of courts. Many also became folk heroes, men who shared their winnings with villagers or protected the poor from corrupt officials. Others became predators, extorting the same people they once defended. Together, the tekiya and bakuto laid the foundation of the Yakuza, one born from trade, the other from chance, both ruled by loyalty, violence, and survival. As the tekiya and bakuto grew in number and power, they realized that survival required more than luck or strength. It required rules. From the chaos of street life, they built a moral structure of their own, a code that would later define the Yakuza for centuries. Loyalty, hierarchy, and obligation. In a world that rejected them, these outcasts created their own version of order, one bound by blood instead of law. At the heart of it was the oyabun-kobun relationship, the father and the child. The oyabun was the leader, protector, and teacher, the kobun, the devoted follower. Their bond was sealed through ritual, often over shared sake. Drinking from the same cup symbolized a sacred adoption. From that moment, they were no longer strangers, they were family. Betrayal of that bond was the gravest of sins, punishable not by exile, but by death. Discipline within these groups was strict. Disobedience or failure could result in yubitsume, the ritual cutting of one's own finger. The offender would slice off the tip of the left little finger and present it to his oyabun as an apology, a literal act of atonement. The missing finger weakened the grip on a sword or knife, symbolizing reduced strength and dependence on one's boss for protection. It was barbaric, yet profoundly symbolic. Loyalty through pain. Honor and reputation were everything. A man's word carried the weight of his soul. To cheat an ally or insult a brother was worse than theft. It meant spiritual corruption. Many of these codes were borrowed from the Bushido, the way of the samurai, adapted for the underworld. Courage, duty, respect, and mercy were ideals twisted into street philosophy. The Yakuza were criminals, yes, but they believed themselves to be Ninkyo Dantai, chivalrous organizations, guided by justice as they saw it. This self-fashioned morality created an illusion of nobility among the criminal poor. Some gangs truly helped the weak, protecting merchants from corrupt officials, distributing food in famines, even enforcing peace in chaotic towns. Others exploited this image to dominate and extort. But whether guardian or predator, every man in the Brotherhood followed the same creed. Once you drank from the sake cup, there was no turning back. Honor was now your law, and the street, your battlefield. By the mid-17th century, Japan's peace had given birth to a paradox. The streets were calm, yet the shadows thrived. While the Takiya controlled markets, it was the Bakuto, the gamblers, who ruled the night. Beneath bridges, inside tea houses, and behind the sliding doors of inns, dice clicked like rainfall. These were not mere games. They were lifelines for men who lived on luck and loyalty. The Bakuto's world revolved around Chohan, a simple dice game where players bet on even, Cho, or odd, Han. But behind the simplicity lay manipulation, strategy, and psychology. Dealers marked dice, controlled throws, and read their opponent's breathing. The best gamblers were as calculating as generals, treating the mat as a battlefield. Fortune favoured the fearless and punished the foolish. In this underground kingdom, honour and deception coexisted. The Bakuto's word was his bond, but cheating was expected. A gambler who lost his money might lose more, his freedom or his fingers. The ritual of Yubitsumi, the self-amputation of a fingertip, was born here, long before it became a Yakuza tradition. The first cut was repentance, the second, a warning. Few survived the third. The Bakuto were despised by the authorities yet strangely indispensable. Local officials often turned a blind eye in exchange for bribes or information. Some Bakuto even worked for the government as kenkaya, professional mediators hired to settle disputes with fists instead of courts. Their influence spread through the countryside, where peasants and ex-samurai found solace in their company and fear in their reputation. Over time, gambling dens evolved into centres of power. Bosses called oyabun gathered loyal followers, forming proto-gangs with ranks, rules, and oaths. These groups operated like miniature armies, disciplined, hierarchical, and bound by unbreakable codes. The line between criminal and protector blurred. In poor villages, Bakuto might lend money, punish thieves, or keep peace. In cities, they extorted merchants and ran entire districts. It was within this murky morality that the seeds of the Yakuza identity were sown. To outsiders, they were crooks. To their followers, they were families. And as Japan's cities grew richer and more corrupt, the gambler's kingdom would rise from the mud, dressed not in armour, but in tattoos, suits, and silence. As the gamblers and peddlers of Edo Japan forged their secret empires, a new language emerged among them, one spoken not with words, but with ink. The tattoo, or Irezumi, became the badge of the underworld, the banner of the forgotten. In a society obsessed with purity and appearance, to mark one's skin was an act of rebellion. For the outcasts, it became something sacred, a declaration that said, "I belong to no master but my own." Early Yakuza tattoos were not art as we know them today. They began as marks of punishment, rings, stripes, or symbols carved into the flesh of criminals to identify their crimes. But just as the outcasts had turned exile into brotherhood, they turned shame into pride. They covered these brands with magnificent images: dragons, tigers, koi, and demons, each a reflection of endurance, courage, or transformation. What was once a scar became a masterpiece. The tattooing process was grueling. Masters used the ancient Tabori method, stabbing pigment into the skin by hand with bundles of fine needles. The sessions could last for months, even years. The pain was relentless, but so was the purpose. Every drop of blood spilled beneath the needle was a vow, to loyalty, to suffering, to the family one had chosen. The designs themselves mirrored the wearer's soul. Dragons symbolized power and wisdom. Koi swimming upstream meant perseverance against fate, The peony represented fleeting beauty and courage, and waves, eternal and untamed, signified life's constant struggle. Together, they formed a full-body mural, hidden beneath clothes, revealed only in moments of trust or defiance. Among the Yakuza's early ancestors, tattoos also served as proof of commitment. To cover one's body entirely was to sever ties with the respectable world forever. No farmer, no merchant, no samurai would hire a man whose skin screamed defiance. The tattoo was exile inked in colour. By the late Edo period, Irezumi had become inseparable from underworld identity. When a gambler removed his robe to reveal a body alive with dragons and storms, it wasn't vanity, it was revelation. It told the world that pain had shaped him, that loyalty had branded him, and that beneath the ink and scars, he had become something more than a man. He had become legend. As the 18th century waned, Japan's underworld had grown into a reflection of the world above, disciplined, hierarchical, and obsessed with honor. The tekiya ruled the markets, the bakuto ruled the dice, and together they shaped a code of conduct that blended the outlaw's cunning with the warrior's pride. They lived by giri, duty, and ninjo, human compassion, two conflicting forces that defined the Yakuza's moral paradox for generations to come. Their rules were unwritten, yet ironclad. Loyalty to one's oyabun, the father of the group, was absolute. Orders were followed without question, and disobedience was atoned for through blood or mutilation. To betray the family was to erase oneself from existence. A man without loyalty was not a man at all. Yet, within this rigid structure, the Yakuza cultivated a strange chivalry. They called themselves Ninkyo Dantai, men of humanity and courage. It was their way of claiming nobility in a life built on vice. They saw themselves not merely as criminals, but as keepers of balance. In towns where officials were corrupt or cruel, gangs sometimes stepped in to enforce their own justice. A thief who preyed on the poor might find his hand severed. A merchant who cheated customers might be forced to repay double. Whether this was true compassion or calculated image building depended on the gang, but it made the Yakuza appear, to some, as protectors of the powerless. Their idea of honor echoed that of the samurai, but was forged in dirt instead of steel. Where the samurai pledged loyalty to their lord, the Yakuza pledged it to their oyabun. Where the samurai died for their clan, the Yakuza bled for their brothers. They even adopted elements of Bushido, the way of the warrior, twisting it into a creed that glorified endurance, discipline, and revenge. But this code was a double-edged sword. The same honor that bound them together also demanded violence to preserve reputation. An insult, a betrayal, even a whisper of disrespect could ignite a war between gangs. In the alleyways of Edo, honor became both shield and blade, a sacred law that justified cruelty as easily as kindness. Thus, the Yakuza were born not only from desperation, but from ideals, a shadow society guided by its own sense of righteousness in a world that refused them dignity. By the late 1700s, the line between hero and villain in the underworld blurred beyond recognition. The gamblers and peddlers who had once been outcasts now wielded real power over markets, neighborhoods, and lives. Some Yakuza leaders became local legends, praised for protecting the weak from corrupt officials. Others became tyrants, extorting the very people they claimed to defend. The Yakuza's story became a mirror of Japan itself, half noble, half brutal. In many towns, the tekiya acted as peacekeepers. They kept order at festivals, stopped thieves, and settled disputes that the magistrates ignored. If a fire broke out or violence erupted, they were often the first to restore calm, through force if necessary. The oyabun collected payments, yes, but he also maintained stability. To the poor, these men were the unofficial sheriffs of the streets. Criminals, yet necessary ones. Their protection wasn't free, but it was reliable. The bakuto, on the other hand, lived closer to chaos. Gambling was outlawed, yet it thrived wherever desperation lingered. Their dens offered escape, danger, and dreams of fortune. But the same men who lent money with a smile could just as easily cut a throat when debts went unpaid. For every gambler who became a folk hero, another became a predator. Their justice was fast and final. Still, both groups shared a strange sense of community. When famine struck or fire destroyed a district, it was often the Yakuza who provided food and shelter. They financed rebuilding efforts, paid for funerals, and lent money without contracts. To them, charity was not virtue but obligation, a way to prove strength and loyalty to the people they ruled. But these good deeds masked darker ambitions. The Yakuza's grip on markets and gambling dens tightened. They collected protection money, fixed dice games, and manipulated trade. Their order was control disguised as kindness. The people learned to both depend on them and fear them. By the dawn of the 1800s, the Yakuza had become both guardian and parasite, two faces of the same coin. In a world of rigid class and silent suffering, they filled the void left by the state. They were not villains in their own eyes, only men doing what the law could not. Yet beneath that moral mask, ambition was quietly sharpening its blade. By the dawn of the 19th century, Japan was changing, quietly but irrevocably. The rigid Tokugawa order that had ruled for over 200 years was beginning to crack. The samurai, once symbols of honor and discipline, were growing poor and desperate. Merchants, once despised, now held the nation's wealth. And in the shadows between them, the Yakuza thrived, feeding on the confusion of a society in transition. The takiya dominated the marketplaces, controlling trade routes and street fairs. The bakuto spread gambling dens from Edo to Osaka, their dice echoing through the countryside. They no longer lived as mere outcasts. They had become a hidden network stretching across provinces. Some oyabun commanded hundreds of men. They could bribe officials, silence rivals, and influence local politics. The Yakuza were no longer beneath the system. They had learned how to bend it. Their reputation, however, remained divided. In one town, a gang might protect farmers from corrupt tax collectors. In another, they were the ones extorting them. Their morality depended entirely on their leader's heart, or his greed. But what united all Yakuza was the belief that loyalty outweighed law. The state was an institution. The oyabun was family. As Japan faced famine, natural disasters, and growing unrest, the Yakuza filled the void left by the government's inefficiency. They distributed food during shortages, punished thieves, and sometimes even negotiated peace between rival villages. These actions blurred the line between crime and charity. Many commoners began to see them not as bandits, but as necessary evils, men who upheld justice when the law had failed. Still, power breeds corruption. The older generation of gamblers and peddlers gave way to more ambitious men, smarter, colder, and deadlier. They saw opportunity not in helping the poor, but in exploiting chaos. As Western influence loomed at Japan's borders, the Yakuza adapted faster than anyone. They became smugglers, traders, and information brokers, thriving in the growing black markets that the government couldn't control. By the 1800s end, the Yakuza were no longer street outcasts. They were businessmen of the underworld, their tattoos hidden beneath silk, their dice replaced by ledgers. The empire born from poverty had evolved into something far more dangerous, an organized shadow state, one built on loyalty, deception, and blood. By the mid-1800s, Japan stood on the edge of transformation. The winds of change were blowing in from across the Pacific, black ships on the horizon, foreign flags, and the crumbling of an old order. The samurai, merchants, and peasants all felt the world shifting beneath their feet. But in the alleys of Edo and the gambling dens of Osaka, another force had already mastered adaptation, the Yakuza. The gamblers and peddlers who once survived on society's scraps had become part of Japan's social fabric. When the Tokugawa shogunate began to weaken, many Yakuza stepped into the chaos, serving as informal enforcers for local merchants or even for desperate samurai clans. They collected debts, guarded goods, and ran information networks that stretched from one end of the country to the other. The state had laws, the Yakuza had loyalty, and in turbulent times, loyalty was worth more than legality. When the Meiji Restoration erupted in 1868, bringing the end of samurai rule, the Yakuza were already waiting to fill the void. Many former samurai, stripped of their privileges, joined their ranks, men of discipline who had lost their masters but not their pride. They brought with them a sharper sense of hierarchy and ritual. The Yakuza, once seen as drifters, now began to resemble an underground order, structured, purposeful, and deeply rooted in Japan's evolving identity. Yet as the nation modernized, their duality only deepened. Some gangs acted as protectors of small businesses, shielding them from exploitation and helping communities survive the rapid shift to industrial society. Others turned fully predatory, thriving on extortion, smuggling, and political manipulation. Their myth, part noble, part monstrous, was already forming. By the late 19th century, their world of tattoos, oaths, and sake rituals had become legend. The Oyabunkobun Code, the hand-cut finger of apology, and the full-body Irezumi were now cultural symbols, as feared as they were admired. The Yakuza had evolved from outcasts to icons, reflections of Japan's own contradictions, loyalty and lawlessness, duty and defiance, beauty and brutality. They began as gamblers and peddlers on the margins of a peaceful empire. They would emerge, centuries later, as its most enduring shadow, a brotherhood born from pain, bound by honor, and destined never to disappear